everybody, Charles for HumbleMechanics.com. Today, we're talking about the top 5 failures of the Mark V Jetta, Rabbit, GTI, and Jetta SportWagen. All right, so the Mark V, the 2005.5-ish to the 2010-ish Volkswagen A platform or the Mark platform car, is one of my favorite cars because it was the first new generation vehicle that came out after I started working on Volkswagens. And they, believe it or not, had their fair share of issues. One thing I want to make sure you guys understand too is that I don't like to use these videos as a, hey, let's bash Volkswagen. These are just simply what happened and what went wrong with a lot of these cars. We can also use this series of videos where we talk about the major failures or the common failures of these cars as something to look at before we buy one. So before you buy a Mark V, take a look at this video and list out some of these things, and these are the things that you're going to want to look at. And at the end of the video, as always, we're going to do a rapid fire of all the things that I could remember that went wrong with these cars. But before we get into the show, let's talk about the sponsor of the day, which is Deutsche Auto Parts. These guys are the Volkswagen Audi parts experts. Awesome service, incredible pricing, a ton of really great DIY videos. They also do some great Q&A shows as well, so check them out at shopdap.com. All right, first up is door latches. You'll notice that a lot of these things are actually common on a lot of generation of Volkswagens, but door latch failures on the Mark V is super common, and it's not just the driver's door, it's actually all around the world on failures of the door latches. And they can cause anything from doors won't lock, doors won't unlock, doors won't open. I've seen that a handful of times. And what was really unique about the Mark V compared to the other generations is instead of pulling the inner carrier out and pulling the window regulator out, you actually removed the skin, the outside of the door, which was terrifying the first time I did it. And after about 2 or 3, I got really good at it. I figured out that if you held the door handle out and spun the bolt out 12 turns, that the handle insert would come out perfect every single time. And then the door skin lined up perfect as well. So it turned out to be really easy, and it's actually now my favorite way to replace a door latch. Number 2 is rear brake wear and brake cable issues. This one actually bit me a couple of times, and I also had to go get customers because their rear brakes would lock up on very low mileage cars. What was happening is one of two things. One, Volkswagens wear rear brakes faster anyway, and it's almost always the inboard pad closest to the caliper that wears first. But in addition to that, there was early brackets that would actually grab the parking brake cable and just pull the brake against the rotor a little bit. Well, obviously you go over a fair amount of bumps driving in a normal everyday driving, and that would wear down these rear brakes really fast. In fact, I had a couple of times where I would look at the outboard pad and there would be almost the whole pad at 15,000 miles, but the inboard pad was actually metal to metal. So we had a lot of those where we were doing brakes really early on and then having to adjust the cable and make sure that it wasn't getting hung in the bracket. Then you'll actually see the early Mark Vs have one style of bracket and the later ones have a different style of bracket, again, because the bracket was catching and pulling the brakes against the rotor. Number 3 is soft touch peeling. So all that nice textured stuff on things like the headlight switch and the window switches and the radio, all of that stuff looks great until you use it a lot and that little stuff starts to peel off, and then of course, you know, people have to scratch at it to make it even worse. But what was happening is these switches, all that soft touch black coating would eventually start to peel off, and you would just have like a white piece of plastic with a light shining through it. This seemed to be even more common on cars that are driven by people that either used a lot of hand lotion or hand sanitizer. That seemed to really accelerate the wear and the peeling of the soft touch. So you'd see like a car with 60,000 miles or something on it, and all the radio buttons would be white, the headlight switch would be white, and the front 2-door window buttons would have all that stuff peeling off. It was really common on that generation, which is odd because it hadn't really been common on any of the earlier stuff. I think they actually changed the texture. It was a thicker material. It had a great feel to it when it was new. Unfortunately, it wore quite a bit faster. And the only real repair for that was to replace whatever component had the wear on it. Number 4, airbag lights. Good old airbag lights. So there were two main causes of the airbag light coming on the Mark V generation. One was the clock spring. And we've talked clock springs to death. I've done other videos about clock springs. If you want to check that out, I'll be sure to link it up for you guys. You can watch that and learn all about the clock spring. But the clock spring failure would almost always make the airbag light come on, as well as the horn not work and the buttons on the steering wheel not work. The most common thing though to trigger the airbag light on that gen vehicle was the side airbags. So in both front seats, there's airbags in the side bolster. So if I was driving along, driver's side has one on this side, passenger side has one on this side, obviously at the outside of the vehicle. We wouldn't want to put airbags on the inside between the two seats. But there's two connectors underneath both seats. One is up underneath the seat, like attached to the bottom of the seat frame. The other is the junction where the connectors from the seat go into the floor and then out to the body harness. And I've seen both of those two connectors fail. In fact, the connector under the seat, there was a recall or a service action, I forget which one, and what we would do is we would cut that connector out and we would hardwire it in. If you had someone that would sit in the seat and let's say was a bigger person, that would push the cushion down and just ever so slightly pull that connector apart and instantly trigger the airbag light to come on. Then the one in the seat, it was the same connector basically, not as common as the one directly under the seat, but that could also cause issues as well. We even had a lot of them, well, maybe not a lot of them, but a fair amount of them that would require the entire side airbag be replaced due to the light coming on over and over and over again. This was actually also an issue on the B6 Passats as well, because there was the same recall. And number 5, this is the one that probably made me saddest about the Mark V generation, and that's headliners falling down. It's become very common to get in a Mark V, which are actually becoming less and less frequent at the dealership, to see the headliner around, the overhead console right here. Or what would more often happen is you would get in it, you'd look back to back out of a parking spot, and you would see the headliner sagging down about this far, especially around the light that's over the back seat. And it seems like maybe the fabric was a little too short or the glue would come unadhered or something like that, but man, tons and tons and tons of these Mark Vs, it seemed to be mostly a Jetta issue where the headliner would sag, and there's some mechanical stuff's not that big of a deal. We fixed that, but for whatever reason, that headliner thing just made me feel really bad for the owners of those vehicles. Unfortunately, the repair was one of two things. It was either recover the headliner or replace the headliner, and they had these really stupid, terrible ribbon cables that would connect all the lights and everything in the headliner, and they were so fragile. The glue or the tape that they used, if you tried to pull it off, it would almost always rip that ribbon cable, so we were putting headliners and ribbon cables in just because that stuff was so fragile and was easy to rip and tear. All right, so there's your top 5. Let's rapid fire these problems. So we had oil leaks. Now remember, on the Mark V, we had a vast array of different engines. We had the pump deuce engine, we had the BPY, we had the 2.5 in all its generations, we had the CCTA engine, and we had the common rail diesel, and oil leaks were common across most of them. Everything from valve cover gaskets to vacuum pumps, oil coolers, you name it. There was a lot of different components that would leak engine oil. We also had CV boot failures. Outer CV boots, inner CV boots, again, pretty common across the brand. We had timing chain issues. The BPYs have timing chain issues. Most of that is due to lack of maintenance. We also have the CCTA engine that has its timing chain issues. I've beat the CCTA timing chain tensioner failure up pretty good. We've talked about that a number of times before. So we had two different engines with timing chain tensioner issues. We had camshaft issues. We have camshaft issues in the BRM engines. For the pump deuce TDIs, we also had the obvious, the well-known BPY camshaft issues where the high pressure fuel pump would fail, the follower would fail, and cause the intake camshaft to fail. We had wiring harnesses inside the doors that would, as the door opened and closed over the years, would break wires and we would have to put a new harness in it. We had oil consumption issues, especially on the BPY. Now this wasn't nearly the issue that Audi had with the A4s, but we did see a handful of these BPYs that needed to be re-ringed. We have dual mass flywheel issues. We have secondary air issues. The 2.5 was sort of plagued with the secondary air problems that had multiple common failures and not a ton of really great ways to diagnose it. We had thermostat issues on the BPY and the 2.5 liter. We had serpentine belt tensioners and rollers failures on especially the 2.5. We had that decoupling pulley on the TDIs fail. The pulley for the alternator would fail, and it would cause this really loud, high-pitched squeak that sounded like a power steering pump failure. In fact, I've seen that pulley fail, and what it'll do is it'll make the tensioner bounce up and down, and I've seen a bunch of those tensioners replaced due to the failure of the pulley on the alternator. We have AC compressor failures. The BPYs were common about that, where the compressor would fail and blow metal through the system, or the desiccant bag inside the dryer would fail and blow desiccant through the system, which ended up being a compressor, a condenser, an H-block, as well as a system flush. But the 2.5 also had its fair share of compressor failures, as well as the common rail TDI had its fair share too. We had a number of radio failures. In fact, there was one time where I think I had to get 6 radios in order to get the right radio, because there were so many productions and different vendors and production splits of radios that I had to order 6 different radios in order to get the right combination of part number, features, and button color to make it work on the vehicle. We had door rattles. In fact, there were TSBs left and right about adding foam here, putting sound dampener there, adding strips here, and what I found and eventually was that simply caulking the door panel really worked just as good as anything else. And finally, we have wheel bearing failures. Not uncommon to have a wheel bearing or two go bad on a Mark V. The great thing on the Mark V wheel bearing is they finally got rid of the stupid press in and out wheel bearings. So they were simply bolt in, which made it way better to replace than having to pull the knuckle off and take it to the press, or invest in a high-dollar tool like the hub tamer. All right, guys, I'm gonna wrap it up there. If you have any questions or comments, post it in the comments section below. Hey, I know I missed some. Post that in the comments section below. Let me know what I missed. If you like the video, throw it a thumbs up on YouTube. I always appreciate that. You can also subscribe on YouTube or on the blog at humblemechanic.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the blog, and obviously right here on YouTube. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Drink of the day is a tall, frosty glass of water.